back to our anime show. I'm bingemonster.
And I'm agreenqueen. Why did you say anything else? Why did you do that? I was so confused.
So the thing is I was gonna think about on the fly like a funny thing to put in here, and I didn't. So I decided to just see where the wind took us.
It took us into pure silence
It
and
did.
peace and serenity,
There's
as
beauty
one
in
might feel.
silence. There's beauty in silence.
There's
Right.
definitely a famous um not haiku haku about that. Wait, what is the poem? What is the poem? What is
Haiku?
the Japanese haiku? Thank you. I was like, there's a famous haiku about that. I'm sure. I'm sure of it.
I'm sure there
Remember
is.
remember in Shogun how they would like
Talk.
recite the haikus together? I was like, this is so cool. This is such an interesting dialogue.
We don't do that. Why don't we do that anymore? Why
Why
don't
don't we do
we?
that anymore?
Yeah, I feel like I don't know. I mean, not that I ever spoken haikus. Now you have
I
me
know,
all.
I know, and it's bad because I just watched Haikyuu, the
And I,
movie. So it's in there. It's really in
haiku.
there. It's so bad.
I also just got like chili in my eye from my lunch that I apparently still had on one of my fingers on my hands. It just rubbed into my eye. So we've got that going for us. Anyways,
We're
today
falling apart.
we're falling apart today. Some pretty cool things have happened in the anime and manga community in the past week. Wanted to talk about a couple of them. There is a inaugural manga award, American Manga Awards, that were just announced in the past week or so, which we're going to talk about. We're also going to talk a little bit about JJK getting a momentary hiatus or an indefinite hiatus due to the mangaka being sick. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a cool musical that we're going to be going to, an anime related musical in October, and a couple of other stuff.
I'm honestly so excited to talk about the American Manga Awards because it feels like the American Manga Awards, this is the first one of its kind. It's brought to us by Left Field Media, who are also the, I guess, creators or organizers of AnimeNYC, as well as Japan Society. And I've been seeing that they have been doing a lot of in tandem events. If you're on AnimeNYC's like mailing list, you probably are informed on a lot of Japan Society's events and so forth. And like Japan Society is a nonprofit organization that is basically leading the charge in bringing like Japanese arts, culture, language, business, and general things like that, mainly to audiences in New York since 1907. That's kind of crazy. I'm like, wow, that's quite a long time, but the very, very impressive. Yeah, there's going to be tons of different categories. It's the first of its kind. I just started to kind of see postings about this kind of out of the blue within like the last 2 weeks. I don't know about you, but it was just kind of like all of a sudden it was like, this is happening, but like on an Instagram post. And I was like, okay, this sounds sick. This sounds awesome. They have some really interesting categories as well. So some of the categories being a Mangaka Hall of Fame, which is super cool. Best new manga, best new edition of classic manga before 2004. So that's what they mean when they're saying best new edition of classic manga. It would generally just mean anything before 2004 because this is 2024, of course. Best lettering, manga publishing hall of fame, best continuing manga series, best translation, best publication design. That's just some of the ones that are announced so far. I would assume there will probably be more to come, but I don't know. Like Binge, what are you most excited about with some of these categories?
Well, I'm interested in even understanding some of these categories better than I do right now, right? Like we
Mm.
were just talking about this before we started the podcast that things like best lettering, things like best publication design, right? I can take a couple of guesses as to what that means. Um, best lettering, I'm assuming, relating to the way that they design kind of the text. Maybe it's the font or the colors or the sizing of the lettering and how it fits onto the page. And for best publication, I imagine it's, you know, more the kind of holistic design on the outside of the manga, as well as, you know, maybe some design on the inside also. I'm not really sure, but I think that um, what's really cool about this is that, you know, these are clearly categories to celebrate the publishing industry, which I
Mm-hmm.
think, at least in my lifetime, I've not really seen done. In a commercial sense. I mean, I'm
Mm-mm.
sure that there are awards that relate to these categories that other organizations are doing. What's interesting about this one, from my perspective, is that the left, oh gosh, what is the name of the organization? The
Left
Left
Field
Field
Media.
Media Group. Exactly. That is, you know, the organizers and creators of AnimeNYC are heavily propping this forum up alongside, to your point,
Mm-hmm.
Japan Society, and I think it's going to bring a lot of credibility to the convention as a whole, towards making New York a center of excellence in terms of the celebration of the medium, of the art, and of the people who contribute to that. So I'm excited. I know we haven't gotten into the judges, and I'm really excited to talk about that. But I think from some of these categories, it'll be nice and kind of refreshing to take a closer look at some of kind of the unsung heroes that we clearly don't talk about enough, that are contributing to the success of these manga. And yeah, I think that's really cool.
I think just to kind of echo what you're alluding to, especially being one of our core values or our core driving forces of this podcast being trying to get anime conversation and appreciation to as large an audience as we possibly can. you know to your point, when we're talking about this, it's like these are the people that are really like doing the groundwork for some of these things. And when you walk into Kinokuniya and you have an entire original manga section in Japanese, and then you have an entire section of every single like volume, everything available in our native language, which would be English, especially here in New York, which it's kind of debatable as I say it, but just because we're a melting pot. Like I I couldn't agree more that this is something really unique and really interesting, um, because these are like the unsung heroes of the popularity and accessibility of hard copy manga, especially in New York. And you definitely can find it here in libraries everywhere. So I think this is going to be really exciting, and I'll be excited to see sort of like how they elaborate on this even going forward, and what's to be announced and so forth. And yeah, they have pretty credible judges. So some of the judges are already pre-selected. um and I don't know if you know some of the names. I haven't necessarily seen anyone that I'm particularly know yet highlighted. But there's also people who can like apply to this. So they're like, if you qualify, like feel free to apply. So they're looking for like just people that work in the manga industry: translators, designers, editors, librarians, authors, anybody that kind of has a hand in the process of getting manga translated um and on bookshelves. They're like, apply and see if you fit. So I think that's also pretty interesting. So early on, they're looking for a really wide, diverse, I think, group of people from all stages of this life cycle. I don't know. What do you think?
I would have expected from the panel of judges to see, you know, different people from the publishing industry. I think that makes a lot of sense, right? I would have even expected to see journalists who cover, you know, anime or manga news and things of that nature. Um, but I was pleasantly surprised in a really positive way to see librarians selected as a part of the panelist judge, and the encouragement of other librarians to submit for consideration to also be a judge. I think that um, to your point, as it relates to the accessibility and availability of manga, that the library is so important. And I know that I'm getting on my soapbox here, but libraries are so important. And they played a huge role when I was a little kid in terms of being able to actually read manga. It wasn't always the case. I think I've spoken about this before on some of our previous episodes that when I was really young, before I had money to be able to purchase manga, I'd go to Barnes and Noble, and so many of the Barnes and Nobles that I grew up going to no longer exist because, with the rise of Amazon came ebooks, and bookstores are just kind of in a decline across the country. Libraries became an important place where I could read a manga for free and take it back when I was done with it. So I also think that in terms of shaping the lives of children, manga has become more accepted and more integrated into the education system. I had one of the no, I noticed that one of the judges was a librarian based in New York City who is on the board of directors for the New York City libraries in terms of how they approach thinking about manga in general. And I think that that's really cool that there's even a board of directors for that, a seat for
Yes.
that.
Mm-hmm.
Not something that I would have really thought about kind of growing up. I don't know if you felt this way, but I mean, the manga section and the comic section in general tended to be really, really small at libraries when I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
I distinctly remember there being kind of a negative connotation to going and reading that versus like a book or like a mystery book or you know
Mm-hmm.
a novel that was better for me to read as a kid. And um, yeah, I think that the thinking there is changing, but just thought that was really cool. Excited to see that on there.
It is super cool. I mean, and especially like, it being based in New York, it kind of makes sense because especially here, it's very, very accessible. I mean, I read all of Soul Leveling by getting it at the library. Like I would
Did you
request
really?
it and they would, oh yeah, that was, I mean, for the volumes that are out and published, I read up to, I think like volume 5,
Mm,
all from the library.
love that.
Um, so yeah, I mean gosh, wow, if you're listening to this and you're someone that works in this industry or you're a librarian, please do apply. I think it's really interesting. um so do you want to speak a little bit about the award process for this?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting part about this announcement is that um, you know this is not going to be fan oriented in terms of the process, in terms of the voting. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to be really these panels of judges that the committee for this for the American Manga Awards really puts together, that has kind of the final say in terms of who wins each of these categories, which I like. I mean, I think there are many forums, including the Crunchyroll Awards. Yes, they're more geared towards anime than they are manga, but where there's a time and space for like the general populace to vote, and I like that there's a place where people who are in this industry have
Mm-hmm.
a venue to be able to you know vote on the things that they really like it, especially as the people who are boots on the ground. I think they have a really unique
Yeah.
perspective that not only will uplift the community, but it'll also expose the broader anime and manga community maybe to titles that otherwise they may not have seen. And that's something
Yes.
I'm super excited about.
I
So,
was just I
no,
was
yeah.
just thinking that same thing, when we're talking about award shows that are like sort of a popular fan vote, it's very, very susceptible to like internet hype. I feel like if a title is just taking internet hype for whatever reason, so many really amazing shows kind of get lost in the sauce a little bit. So I think to your point, this would be actually a really exciting opportunity for folks to see titles that people in this industry are like, no, this is good, and actually kind of be exposed a little bit more to maybe some things that we hadn't heard of before or weren't on our radar.
Yeah.
I wanted to just add that in and echo what you were saying, because I think that's super important and actually really interesting, especially in its like conception the first year. Like I think it's kind of nice that they're keeping it um really within the trailblazers in the industry. Ooh.
Yeah. And to ensure that there is um, a really nice dichotomy or a really nice robust list of manga considered, the way that they've laid out the process is such that publishers can submit their own manga for consideration, and they're able to submit up to 3 titles per category, which means that in theory a single publisher can, submit, gosh, what is it, like, uh,
Three titles
24,
per category? Oh.
yeah, 3 titles per category, so that's like what,
Oh.
24 total titles in theory. I
Yeah.
mean, they could probably submit the same title for maybe multiple categories, so maybe it would
Mm.
be less, but up to potentially uh 24 different titles across all the categories if they wanted to choose a unique title for each category to submit. And there are many different publishers, right? So I think the judges are going to have a tough time of having to comb through all of these to make their choice. But um, I would expect to see a really diverse set of nominations and winners as a result of that. So that's pretty cool. And once they submit them, the judges will review all of the submissions, and the winners will be announced the night before Anime NYC, which is August 22nd. Right
Yeah.
now, it's being described as an invite only event. I'd be curious. I think you even alluded to this earlier. If they eventually open up kind of like a Zoom call, or not a Zoom call, but like a
Like a live
telecast.
stream or a
Yeah, like a live
telecast, yeah.
stream of the event, or if the winners will be announced during Anime NYC as well the next day, what that's going to look like. But hopefully, it also encourages Americans to look at these winners and go out and buy them, and support the industry,
Yes.
and, like I said, give them an opportunity to learn a little bit more about these other manga that are being celebrated.
Well, I think the timing of it is very fitting and kind of strategic in a way, because all of these publishers are going to have a booth at Anime NYC, as they do always.
Right.
So you'll be able to see, oh, what was, oh wow, this, book from Yen Press or Kondasha like won 3 different categories, but I had never heard of it. You can buy it for probably what they usually do is when you buy it at the convention, it's a little bit cheaper too. Like they're discounted
Yeah.
a lot of times. So it's like, oh, now I can just go like pick that up and, support Kinokuniya or what have you, any of these booths that are going to be there. Not that Kinokuniya is necessarily a publishing company, but like it's a store that sells these things. So
Hmm.
when you buy it, you support it. Um but the turnaround is kind of quick, right? For the judges.
Yeah.
Like it's only 2 months ish. I mean, maybe a little over, but very soon, only 1 month is they're gonna have to just really kind of hone in and pick their winners. I'm very excited to see how this will play out over the next couple months, honestly.
Yeah, I
Um,
think one thing that they're doing to make it a little bit uh, simpler for the judges to do their job is they're breaking these judges down so that they focus on certain categories instead of the
mm,
judges voting on all of them, which
mm-hmm.
kind of makes sense, right? To some degree. Otherwise, it would be really difficult to be able to, you know, confidently and sufficiently
Yes.
review all of these different submissions for every single category. So I think they're trying to make it a little easier on that side.
Especially if they're in New York, because y'all, like, New Yorkers, we're
We're
busy.
busy.
We're doing 12 things at once. It is a rise and grind culture here. So these
For
people are
sure.
not just doing one thing, they have tons of thousands of things they're also doing. um but it's speaking of this, I kind of want to shift gears to something a little bit controversial-ish, but I think it's, you added this in here, and I think you have a lot of context to it, and I definitely want you to give all the context to it. But there was kind of a can you call it a scandal? Kind of a
I think
scandal
so.
in the anime industry quite recently. So I don't know if anyone has heard of the anime Dahlia in Bloom, but the producers of Dahlia in Bloom basically, it's an isekai romance anime coming out soon. They had basically put out a statement after a scandal happened, where they essentially admitted that, hey, we don't know if North Korea, animators in North Korea, had a hand in animating this anime. So what we have to do is completely redo the animation. That is the through line story. But Binge Monster, if you could add like all the fluff and all the context to this, I think the listeners would really appreciate that.
Well, what happened was they got a little exposed, and as a result, they had to do an investigation, put that statement forward. Um,
And
you
try to
know,
save
and
face.
yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think that my gut tells me that they were a little thrown off by this. Yeah, my gut tells me that they were um, they were thrown back a little bit by this. I don't think that they fully really knew. The story that is being told is that
Mm-hmm.
um, a Chinese firm was outsourced to do some of the animation, and this is a really common practice.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, what really motivates the studios to do this is the ability to pay, uh, uh, lower wages, lower cost of labor to animators in China. Potentially below the minimum wage that they have in Japan, and they're able to do that and scale that out as needed as a way to make sure that that they're meeting animation deadlines, that they are able to produce these animations on budget and so forth. So unfortunately, this is and in addition to that, it also allows for them to retain less full time animators in Japan because
Mm-hmm.
they're doing they're able to limit it to part time work because they're able to outsource this stuff to Japan. So as I said, this is a pretty common practice. This is definitely not just this one studio that does it. I think a
No.
great majority of the major studios do this to some degree. Now, what happened was one of the um animation studios in China who was hired to do the outsourced work outsourced it to
Yes.
another company. And in their defense, what they're saying is oh, we outsourced it to that company that outsourced it to that company that
Yeah.
uh depend I don't know how many layers down they're claiming, but at some point the work got outsourced to an animation studio in North Korea
Mm-hmm.
called SEK Studios. um, and this is the North Korean animation studio that the report states was behind some of the animation for the show. And
Mm-hmm.
due to the ongoing sanctions that the United States has in place against North Korea, which not only prohibits American companies from doing business with North Korean entities, but also all of our allies and anyone who wants to remain in good political status, negotiation status, compliance with trade agreements between their country and the United States has to adhere to these sanctions as well. And Japan is not just motivated by those sanctions. I mean, domestically, they're also quite motivated to not working with North Korean companies. They're
Yeah.
not in really any economic, political, or military uh, alliance with North Korea. If anything, they're kind of enemies, near coast enemies.
Yeah.
North Korea habitually fires missiles off into the Japanese Sea and into Japanese waters, not far from the mainland. In fact, I heard even a couple of weeks ago from my brother-in-law who lives in Japan that there were sirens in the northern part of Japan because there were North Korea was shooting missiles over there um, and so forth. So they're definitely not friendly neighbors,
Mm-mm.
but China and North Korea are. They
Mm-hmm.
benefit from each other economically in many different ways. They're allies. So there's really no law in place prohibiting companies in China from working with North Korea. That said, there are not really private companies in North Korea. North Korea being a state actor has its hands in anything related to do with business. So there's really
Mm-hmm.
no way in theory for there to be a business that's just innocently located in North Korea that should be considered outside of the bounds of the sanctions that we have against North Korea. Every company is state owned, unfortunately. So
Mm-hmm.
that's really the controversy here is somehow the work made its way to a North Korean studio, and that should never have happened. And as a result, to your point, the studio had to roll everything back and do everything from scratch in house, as opposed to ever working with that vendor either again or at least on this project. Just because they were not able to verify with 100% confidence that they had
Yeah.
an outsource that works for them. So that's what happened.
That's the thing. It's like they were there were some there were I believe it was like one of the companies, and correct me if I'm wrong, one of the other outsourced companies was like, we will not give this information. So with that, it was like, okay, well, we cannot confirm nor deny, so we have to just assume yes to 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 make this okay. I
Yeah,
think that was what it
basically,
was.
exactly. So basically, when this report had surfaced and rumors were starting to go on to spread online, the studio conducted an audit with their vendor, the
Yeah.
outsourced studio, and that studio, in response, refused to comply with that audit. And
Mhm.
uh, at the end of the day, that might as well be the same thing as just admitting guilt, right? Like if you refuse the audit, you obviously have something to hide, right? So I think out of an abundance of caution, the studio said, "Look, at this point, there may be legitimate claims to this. We actually can't prove it didn't happen. We're just going to do it all ourselves over again." So
Yeah. Controversy in the anime world. Oh goodness. There's also, this is not necessarily controversy, but I think it's definitely something that we should talk about because I know that this is a large title that many, many people listen to and spoil for the rest of the community. Thank you. But that being said, the unfortunate news that JJK Jujutsu Kaisen is taking a hiatus because their mangaka has health concerns. I was just gonna say there's not like a lot of details, which like thank goodness, right? Like to save their privacy and everything, but it is going on a hiatus, and we've seen that happen tons of times. We don't know how long. Yeah,
I mean, burnout and the amount of stress that's involved in doing these mangas for years and years is incomprehensible as far as I'm concerned. I mean, um, this industry does not allow really for mangakas to take their time and to have a work life balance that is remotely considered to be healthy. Being able to produce high quality work week over week, every single week for years in a row and for some decades. You have these mangakas like, Ishiro Oda, who's been working on One Piece for forever, Musashi Kishimoto, who did Naruto for decades, Tite Kubo with Bleach, right? And you see that these guys are constantly producing extremely high quality work week over week for not years but decades. You can't not think about the toll that has on their body, right? Like the stress of that, the absolute limited amount of sleep that they're getting. They're probably getting on average, I don't know, 4 hours of sleep to meet deadlines, working with editors, storyboarding, thinking about the future, having to remember and retain all of the plot points and the character work that they've done. I mean, it exponentially multiplies with these complex stories that have been around for decades, right? To be able
Mm-hmm.
to do it flawlessly, so masterfully, and keep the quality of the content at an extremely high level in ways that fans demand is exceptionally like incredible. I hope that we're nearing a point where we can reopen that conversation. Um, and you know, as a fan, you know, I I can't help but want weekly updates. Of course, like I love these stories, but at the same time, it's killing people. Like it's not a
Yeah.
sustainable. There's no metric from any health system around the world that will say that what they're doing is healthy. There is no indicator that what they're doing in any way can be considered okay. And there is no other industry that I can think of quite like it that demands such rigor from an employee just to complete the basic job. So, you know, as much as I selfishly as a fan want updates every single week, and of course I do, at the risk
Mm-hmm.
of having no story at all, you know, and no story finishing, right?
Yeah.
This is something that happens in our industry. We can look at Hunter x Hunter as an example for that. We can,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we don't know what happened to Akira Toriyama, but he wasn't particularly old, right? I can't imagine that years or decades of working on his show didn't impact him in his health in some capacity. Um, you know, there are other stories like this, like Tower of God was on hiatus for over a year. I feel like the Helsing prequel
Mm-hmm.
is never going to be finished. Vagabond may never be
Mm.
finished. There are entire stories where people get so burnt out that they just quit and either completely retire altogether or maybe move on to another story like the creators of Freezing did back in the day. And so, you know, I don't know. It pains me to see this. I am not someone who reads the Jujutsu Kaisen manga every week over week. Um, but it to your point, this is a very popular manga that has a lot of people's attention right now, and you know, I just hope we can use it as a talking point to really reevaluate this industry that we love and what we can do as a fan base to really support these artists who literally give their lives to telling these stories as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's actually funny because I stopped reading Jujutsu Kaisen week to week because the story was so good and complex at the time. Like, you know, just the way that the specificity with the the fights and who can do what and the powers and the abilities and the specificity and complexity, and that's kind of a running joke. I was like, I actually can't read this week to week. Um, you know, because of the quality of that, I'll say, and not just that I was confused. um, but yeah, like I really wonder, you know, because I think something that's actually kind of special about the way that anime has developed is that, like, okay, they'll put out 12 episodes and then maybe next season they'll get to put out 12 more, or maybe they'll put out a full 24 and then the next year we'll get 24 again or something like that. But I wonder if there is more ways that sort of that kind of like, here is a block of the story, now it's out, and now we can go back or, you know, take our time or what have you. I'm like, I wonder if that will start to come into the manga space, and how can it and what have you. I mean, I know that obviously anime is built off the backbone of manga, so it's like hard to say like, oh no, but anime does it so well, you know, with manga setting the standard. But I don't know, I just wish there was some way that that could happen where it's like, okay, now we wait till next season when this is now going to come out week to week again.
Yeah, and it really depends, right? Sometimes anime takes a year to give the manga a chance to catch up and create enough source material
Yeah.
for the following season, right? Some depending on the show that you're watching, one episode in the anime could adapt anywhere from 2 to sometimes I've seen upwards of 7 chapters be adapted in the same episode. And
Mm.
sometimes they'll skip unimportant things to cruise the story along, but it happens, right? So, I mean, you figure there's 52 weeks in a year, there's 52 chapters. If they're adapting, 3 to 4 in like 12 episodes, that's the whole years worth of stuff, right?
You're
And so in
so
many
right.
ways they like have to keep up with that pace, otherwise the anime is going to eclipse. And then you run into things that anime fans can't tolerate, which is filler. To try to bridge, and even then they always will put in like a recap episode or filler just to give some breathing room, even then, right?
Yeah.
um
I'm thinking of solo leveling. I was so angry.
oh, that recap episode, yeah.
Oh, that recap
um
episode was so infuriating.
Yeah, so I mean, don't get me wrong. There are some anime that when they come up to where the manga is, they'll have an entire arc of filler, or maybe they just pause entirely until the source material catches up. But by then, a number of things could happen. Maybe the title has lost popularity, and maybe it doesn't get funded, so it takes so long to come back that the anime never really fully catches up. um, so there's also the threat of that, right, which looms over the shoulders of a mangaka, I'm sure. So
Hmm.
it's complicated. It's complex.
I hope we see some changes, to be completely honest, because it's I mean, we discuss it so many times in this podcast, and it's so not good. The animators, the mangakas, like they are just worked absolutely to the bone, to literal illness, where they're like, no, I'm too ill to continue my job now, and that's just, you don't like to see that. You do not like to see that.
Definitely not.
um I guess I'm gonna try to quickly shift gears to something maybe a little bit more light, and talk about something that we have planned a month from now. But we planned this last week, and I am so excited, and equally like I don't know if I'm even gonna like it. And of course, I am talking about the Attack on Titan musical, which is coming to New York City in October. I am so excited because like, and it's so funny, like, well, I recently watched the trailer. You also watched the trailer. It's out, and it just kind of gives a couple of clips, I'll say, of the live musical performance. And even in it has a quote from Hajime Isayama that says like something along the lines of like Attack on Titan was meant to be in this way, or like this is the perfect way to tell this story. And I was like, I am so excited, but I am so like, really? I don't know. What do you think? What do you think about
um
this?
so I watched the trailer for this. Before I talk about what I think, just for our
Sure.
listeners, I looked to see if they were doing this show absolutely anywhere but New York, and they're not, as far as I could tell, at least in the United States. It's just New York City.
Mm-hmm.
I was planning to talk about the different cities they were going to go to, and I was actually a little surprised they're only doing it in New York. And for what, 2 nights? Is it 2 nights? The 11th through the
It's
13th?
3 nights,
Okay,
one
three
weekend.
nights.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess maybe they're just testing the waters to kind of see, even at pre-sale, or like the pre-sale numbers of what it's going to look like. I'm sure it's expensive, given the trailer, which I'll talk about in a second, to bring that show overseas and to bring it over here, only for it not to do well. So I'm sure they're trying to be conservative with picking the cities and the dates and so forth. But just thought that was interesting. I'd have imagined that if you're gonna bring it all the way to the U.S., then maybe you do one on the East Coast and at least maybe one on the West Coast.
Yeah.
I don't know, like San Francisco or San Diego, which is or even Los Angeles for that matter, which are big
Yeah.
hubs that are used to hosting these kinds of events, you'd think that they would have done. But having said all of that, having watched the trailer, I'm really excited for it.
I'm so excited.
I'm really excited for it. I may have some of the same worries as you in
Yeah.
terms of like how this is going to look, but I will say this. Last night, oh not last night, sorry, this past weekend, I went to go see Lion King on Broadway. And it's my favorite
Oh
show.
yeah.
It's my favorite show. It has been since I was a little kid. It's the show that inspired me to want to do theater, or at least to be a performer or an actor in some capacity, when I grew up, and ended up, as a result of that, going off to acting school, and that's how we met. Um,
Yes.
and it played such a big role. And seeing it again on Broadway, and this time I took my wife. We sat in the orchestra section, and they do such a great job of bringing you into the world with all the puppets. And if you haven't seen Lion King on Broadway, go watch it if you even remotely liked Lion King as a kid. But one thing that I'll say about that is, now seeing it as an adult that close to the stage, I mean, like, because it's a show that I really loved, I was able to like look past it. But like, some of the sets, I mean, it's a kid show. It was built, like, I think of the Stampede moment. Have you seen Lion King on Broadway by chance?
I saw it when I was a kid.
Okay.
I saw it when I was a child.
So,
Yeah.
so there are obviously these moments in the show where lots of big things happen. For example, they're simulating the thousands of wildebeests coming down the hill in the very famous scene of Lion King where Mufasa, sadly meets his end. And
What?
oops,
I'm sorry.
spoiler alert.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
But you see the way that they use animations and lighting and puppetry, and they use the set to tell the story. And there's obvious limitations when you're doing something like that on a stage.
Mm.
So, having seen that and then having watched the trailer to the Attack on Titan musical, I don't know. I'm pretty impressed with what I saw with the Titans and the gear and them flying around. Like, I mean, that's what I assume was happening. I don't know. Like, I'm pretty excited about that.
I would passionately like to clarify. I have no issue. In fact, most of my excitement is, in fact, around how it looks.
Yeah, it looks really cool.
It looks stellar. It looks actually very, very cool, and I am very excited to see how they do it.
Yeah.
What I am nervous about is how and what parts of the story. Like, I'm is this a season 1 telling, because obviously they can't do this in more than 3 hours. Like, this is
Right.
probably like a 2-hour show, maybe with intermission. I don't actually know. I've never seen a show that from Japan. Like, I've never seen a musical that way. I can assume it's maybe like how American musicals are typically done, 90 minutes to like a 2-hour ish thing with intermission and so forth. But that's where my like confusion is. I'm curious to know and excited to know what part of the story we're telling. That's I would
It's a
like to
good point.
passionately clarify. It looks phenomenal, and I am very excited. But me and Cheeks, or me and Al, my boyfriend, we were talking, and we're like, like, what is this? Like, are they trying to? And I'm like, they're absolutely not. They're not going to try to tell the whole series in 2 hours. But like, is this probably just like a season 1 telling? And I was like, yeah, I think that's probably what it is. I don't know, but just I needed to passionately clarify. I was like, let me be very clear.
Yeah.
I am very excited for the
I
spectacle.
It's hard to tell, right? Like, it was unclear how far into the story that they're going to go. I'm worried about how we're going to understand it. Like, how are we going to do subtitles? That's going to be
Oh yeah.
a interesting thing that they have to overcome somehow.
Well, has because I mean we're basically going on a double date, and your wife is coming as well, which
Yeah.
I'm so excited. Has she watched Attack on Titan the first season?
No, no, we're gonna watch it leading up to it though.
Yeah,
We've discussed this,
yeah.
so we are gonna watch it. It should be interesting for sure.
Because I don't. I mean, I know that they like. I know that certain shows will have subtitled performances.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for folks who uh hear differently or have are hearing compromised or what have you, um, different bodied people. So I don't know if it will be. I can imagine it could be subtitled, but I was also like, I guess I'm prepared if it's not,
Mm. Yeah, because you know
because
the
I
story.
know it's happening,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
That's a really good point. It was wrong of me to assume that it will be subtitled, but I imagine if they want to be successful, they'll probably need to do some level of that.
Yeah.
So I hope that they keep that in mind. It should be good though. You know that Crunchyroll had initially made the announcement
Mm-hmm.
and had uh, provided a pre-sale option, which is no longer available. I think the pre-sale ended on, was it June 2nd, I think, or June 3rd, and now
Yeah,
it's
yeah, and
just
then
general admission, open to the public. Not that you were able to get a discount or anything by going through the
no, no.
Crunchyroll. It was just access to the tickets faster than general
Yeah,
public.
they said that they sent an email, but like I straight up called the box office. I'm like, I'm reading that I was also about to buy like a Kinokuniya membership. I was like, I was like, I'm gonna need a code right now to get into this pre-sale. And they were so nice. Yeah, apparently there was an email sent out, but then when I asked you, I don't think you
Yeah,
really,
I don't think
you
I
know, since
got one.
you control our Crunchyroll account that I definitely don't mooch off of, but yeah, you are the controller of our Crunchyroll account. Um, yeah, they said they sent an email, but you didn't see it, right?
No, no, I didn't. Yeah.
Lost in the fray.
Well, we got a
But
ticket, so that's all I care about.
I was like, I'm calling them. They need to hear my voice because I'm like, I have a feeling, just a feeling that the people running this at, I think it's at New York City Center or something,
Mm-hmm.
that's like, it's, an off Broadway theater. I was like, I have, maybe they do, but I probably feel like they don't know what the hell this is
Yeah, probably
or
not.
how important this is
Yeah.
or anything like that or why someone would want to see this. Maybe they don't even know this. I was like, I'm sure I'm talking to someone who's like just wants to sell tickets, and I,
Yes.
my friend, am here to buy them. So it's like, I'm sure this is going to be an easy process of just me being like, listen, I'll do anything to give you my money. And then be like, yeah, okay, sure.
This is the last thing that I'll say on this. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I imagined that the people who attend this will, partially be a theater going crowd that's also watches anime. But I also
Mm-hmm.
imagine there's going to be a large percentage of the audience that is not, you know, typically made of people who normally would go see a musical, who are true, just
Mm.
diehard anime fans. I wouldn't be surprised if people show up to this musical in full cosplay. I would. I'm
Oh,
surprised, quite frankly, that the theater and the website doesn't mention anything about what you can and cannot wear to go watch this musical. Just in
wow.
general, I'm
Yeah.
just thinking about this,
Yeah.
right? Like they're if we don't hear anything between now and a week before, I would not be shocked if they the people who work at the theater are shocked with who comes to see this musical and what they're wearing,
Yes.
just generally.
And even the performers, like I don't know how Japanese like musical theater goers that audience is, but like for example, I know like in it's a big thing in K-pop, and I know obviously Korea is different from Japan, obviously, but like I know that there can be a difference in the way things are received in cultures. Like they don't hoop and holler at K-pop concerts in Korea. Like are they standing ovation hooping and hollering at musical theater shows? Because sometimes that happens. Like I've been to
Yeah,
I've seen a whistle happen in a Broadway show. Like, you know what I mean?
yeah.
So I'm like, I wonder how that's going to be for them too. I hope we can find some information on their experience. I wonder if there's going to be like if they're making a documentary series. Like, does this happen in Japan? I would be so curious what how those like performers feel, if they're excited about this or if they're like, oh god, gosh darn it, I don't want to do this. Like,
That's a
you
really good
know,
question. Whether or not they feel that there's prestige in performing in New York. I mean, I imagine that they feel some level of that, but that's a
yeah,
very American point of view, right? Like,
of course,
you
yeah.
know, in the US, performing in New York is like this big great thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's just it that's a really good point. I'd be super curious what their take is before and after produce. I'd pay a couple bucks to watch that documentary. 100%.
Oh yeah,
I really
easily.
would.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
I'm so excited for this. You know, we touched on a lot of really interesting stuff today, some controversial, some just informative and very interesting, you know, new coming things that we'll touch on. You know, we're definitely looking forward to the manga awards and so forth, and we'll keep you tapped in there. Also AnimeNYC, we're both going to go. We're both going to finally be there one day. Very excited for that. So, lots of really fun things that we'll be reporting on with you guys, and with that, this has been our anime show, and I'm a Green Queen.
And I'm Binge Monster.